Andrew Lewer to move Amendment A.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The reason why I've tabled my amendment is that the bill in its current form has a problem. This section of the Public Order Bill is leading us into the territory of thought crimes and creates unprecedented interference with the rights to freedom of speech and thought in the UK. Yes.
If he were to go on Twitter now, he would find a recording of an arresting officer telling a lady that praying silently is already a crime. And we haven't passed this bill yet. Are we not really in Orwellian territory of thought crime, as he said?
I couldn't agree with my honourable friend more. This is the concern within this. And the section of the bill I'm referring to is Lord's Amendment 5, amended in the House of Lords by Baroness Sugg on the matter of interference within buffer zones. Now, I understand that many people will find it highly inappropriate for vocal or difficult protests to be right outside abortion clinics, and I categorically condemn harassment against women at all points in their life, let alone near an abortion facility. But that's a world away from the police being able to detain people and question them over what they're doing if they're merely standing there or praying quietly, or worse, if they are praying silently, and be asked by the police, by agents of the state, what are you thinking about? Yeah.
I thank the member for giving way, and I commend him for bringing this to the House. Does he agree with me that the government could do one thing today, and they could indicate very clearly that this does not apply to people engaged in prayer? And secondly, does he agree with me that if the government allows this to continue, that they're going to turn the police into a laughing stock? When people mock them and say, what about all the knife crime, what about all the other problems that you have, and you're arresting people for silently praying, it really does make a fool of the police, doesn't it?
I think it does cause reputational damage to the police. The videos that some colleagues have already seen are hugely disturbing and make it very difficult for ministers to stand up and talk about the police is on your side and they'll defend you when there's a woman on her own standing perfectly still being harassed by the police. And I agree entirely with the comments that he's made. So what are you thinking is within the bill in its current state and remains despite the Suggs amendment. And such actions entirely unacceptable in a free and open society. And I could have my pick of dystopian novels, and one of which has already been referenced, where it would not be out of place. These yes.
The honourable member for giving way, and no one at all on any side of the House wants women or anyone to be harassed going about their lawful business. But does he agree with me that there's already legislation down so local councils can apply buffer zones around abortion clinics and other such areas when there is necessary? And I think 3 or 4 other local authorities have actually put in buffer zones already, so this extra amendment is not necessary as they already have the powers?
Yeah, and indeed this amendment extends something that's already quite disturbing, where some of these video instances have already taken place, still further. The zones would be the only place in the UK, the only place where consensual communication is banned by the state. And simply saying that sentence makes it seem such an absurdity. And to those who would say it would never happen, it has already happened. In December last year in Birmingham, Isabel Vaughan-Bruce was searched, arrested, interrogated, placed on a criminal trial for silently praying within one of these zones, and has now been arrested again. And only last month...
Will my honourable friend give way?
Hello.
I think there's an important detail that's missing from what my honourable friend just said, which is, my understanding is that when she was arrested, the clinic wasn't even open. I mean, it just seems that we are going to extrapolate on an extrapolation to make absolutely sure that anybody can be arrested for anything if we continue down this line.
That's exactly right. Thank my honourable friend for that contribution. And indeed, the questions there were, are you praying? Answer, I might be. What are you praying about? Well, I'm praying in my head. It's extraordinary that leads to somebody being arrested in this country in 2023. And last month, a father, an army veteran, was fined in Bournemouth after being grilled by the police regarding what he was silently praying about in his own head. This points the way to a world where freedom from offence, or even potential offence, supersedes freedom of speech and religious belief. And we've created, therefore, a situation where we can impose criminal penalties for silent thought. And there will be countless ramifications. And for one, it would make it increasingly difficult for my honourable friend, the MP for Congleton, as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for freedom of religion or belief, to advocate for those freedoms abroad. We often see debates in this House where we're all sort of telling the rest of the world what to do, and they'll turn round to us and say, how can you lecture us about religious freedom when there are areas where you can't even pray in your own country without being arrested and hauled off by the police?
Very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and because he's speaking first, I'd like to give him an opportunity to anticipate an argument with which I have some considerable sympathy that we're going to hear urged against him. And that is that we have seen in other countries, particularly the United States, where there are loud, noisy protests outside abortion clinics, and that's what's undoubtedly led to this movement for zones. So will he confirm that if his amendment goes through, it won't in any way affect the ability of the law to prevent women being genuinely harassed when they go to abortion clinics?
I'm grateful for that, and that's an extremely important part of this amendment, that it makes sure that those protections are very much still in place, as indeed they already are under the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022. Censorship of this sort's a notoriously slippery slope, and it might not be your thoughts that are being criminalised today, but I think we should all be careful not to open the door to that tomorrow about some other opinions that people might hold about something else. I do believe that the sub-amendments provide some welcome scope for an improvement to address some of the concerns I've mentioned, but issues remain, and hence why this amendment today. It provides much-needed clarity to the broad and vague terminology currently in the sub-amendment of influencing that's in the bill. The amendments introduce no substantive change to the revised Clause 10, and they therefore respect, whatever individuals' opinions of that are, they respect the desire of both houses to introduce buffer zones. But they seek to ensure that any law doing that doesn't impose an unreasonable limit on freedom of speech and thought, as was seen in the recent prosecution against those engaged, and I can still hardly believe I'm saying this in the House of Commons, the prosecution in this country against those engaged in silent prayer. The first would therefore specify an exempt consensual communication, silent prayer and peaceful presence from criminalisation, and the second would pause the implementation of censorship zones until the government carries out a review into what's really going on outside clinics in the UK, not in the USA or in other countries. And in 2018, this same government found that such zones would be disproportionate and unnecessary, since the vast majority of activity was peaceful and helpful, instances of harassment were rare, and existing legislation, as my honourable friend has just mentioned, was perfectly capable of dealing with any instances of criminality. So what's changed? Law must be evidence-based. The evidential basis for the crackdown has been paltry, and I hope my elected colleagues will join me in demanding that our laws are fair, just and considered. It's an abdication of good and standard process in this House that this part of the bill has made it this far in its current state. Much of what buffer zones claim to deal with is already dealt with in law, and more effectively under the Police Crime and Sentencing and Courts Act, yes.
I'm extremely grateful for having given way, which is precisely why, Mr Speaker, successive Prime Ministers and Health Secretaries, including the existing Chancellor of the Exchequer, took the view there was no need for further action, and indeed didn't see this as a matter of a free vote, which abortion, as a generality, rightly is. This is about freedom. It's not about the purpose of that freedom or the location of it. It's about the ability to think and speak and pray freely.
Yes, it is, and that's a very important point, that this isn't about a debate about opinions about abortion. Opinions about abortion are very wide and widespread and differ hugely throughout the House. This is not about that. It's about the fact that the PCSO already gives police the power to, quote, place any condition on a public assembly that's necessary to prevent disorder, damage, disruption, impact or intimidation. It's already there. That's far more targeted and proportionate, and if you don't feel that's sufficient, then that's a conversation about PSPOs, not imposing nationwide buffer zones. Therefore, those who don't accept my First Amendment and don't go along with this must be able to justify both to themselves and the public why they don't believe private prayer is a fundamental human right in the United Kingdom. This bill must absolutely not outlaw our fundamental human rights, and I remain far from convinced that unamended it will not. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was elected to this place in a free and fair election, and I come here and say not what I'm asked to, not what I'm told to, but what I believe. Similarly, my constituents make representations to me in a free and open way, fearlessly. They sometimes agree with me and sometimes they disagree with me, and part of the glory of our democracy is that we can exchange views, that we can learn from others, that we can disagree openly and fairly and without, as I said, fear. And that would have been taken as read as a way of describing not just this place and our representative democracy, but the character of a free society, a society in which we're all proud to live. At least I could have said that until very recently. But now all is altered. In our university, women are intimidated for simply saying that sex is a biological fact. Academics are intimidated, silenced sometimes, for championing our history and our heroes. And worst of all, which brings me to my honourable friend's amendment, we now have people arrested for praying, interrogated by the police, asked what they're praying about, what they're thinking. This is, as my honourable friend said, dystopian. It's like a mix of Huxley, Philip Dick and Orwell. It is unthinkable that we should be living in a society where what people think has become a matter of police interest, but more than that, not merely a matter of police inquiry. The lady concerned was arrested and charged. She went to court. Of course, in the end, she was acquitted, but that's not the point. The very fact that she could have been arrested for what she thought, for praying, is, in a much overused word, chilling. I happily give way to my honourable friend.
Grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Surely the point that we have to be careful about is the use of words, as the honourable lady, who I regard as a personal friend, did use, words like impede. Thinking and praying is not impeding. Actually shouting and live streaming and doing offensive things to people going to have a procedure is impeding. And if I understand the amendment that's been put down by my honourable friend who introduced this part of the proceedings, he is only talking about things that do not impede. I think that's right, and that's the only basis on which I could vote for this amendment.
I entirely, well, my right honourable friend, I should say, will be pleased but not surprised, given that he knows me so well, to hear that I entirely agree with it. I would not support loud, aggressive protests outside abortion clinics. They do take place in some other countries. The evidence in this country is extremely thin that they take place here, and indeed a previous health secretary conducted a review to establish that fact. But if that was in any way likely or possible, or made more possible by this amendment, I wouldn't be speaking in support of it. So my right honourable friend is entirely right. This is about peaceful, silent protest. And in moving this bill, I will give way again in a moment, if my right honourable friend will allow me. In moving this bill at its inception, the government rightly said they were doing so because they were against violent, disruptive protests. They had in mind people gluing themselves to roads, stopping ambulances, or rushing to save lives. And I support this bill. I support its objectives because that kind of disrupted and violent process is incompatible with a free and open and peaceful society. But it is extraordinary that simultaneously, having said that they were in favour of peaceful protest, because that was the defence, we're in favour of an open society, different opinions, the right to put your case, to protest peacefully, the government now is failing to support an amendment tabled by my right honourable friend, because the government refused to table it, to protect people's right to protest in the very peaceful, very indeed silent way, which a few weeks ago they were saying that they were prepared to defend. I'll give way first to the right honourable gentleman, then to the honourable lady.
I am most grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, but can I ask him as a matter of interpretation of this amendment? Because it seems that this amendment will create exactly the kind of conflicts and disruption to public peace that it is intended to avoid. If somebody kneels ostentatiously to pray in front of someone on their way to an abortion clinic, what is that intended to do? And yet this amendment says such communication or prayer shall not without more be taken to be influencing any person's decision. Why else would somebody kneel down and pray in front of a woman on the way to an abortion clinic unless it was intended to influence that person's decision? I think that there is a balance to be struck here between the rights of people who pray, like him and me, and the rights of people trying to avail themselves of a perfectly legal service to which they have a right.
Well, I don't know how often the right honourable gentleman prays, maybe more often than I do, although my need to do so is probably greater. But he must understand that prayer does two things. It sends a message, one hopes, to the Almighty, and it provides solace for the person praying. So it may well be the person praying outside this clinic is sending a message, but that message is just as likely to be a transcendental one as it is to any individual in the proximity of the place. And the idea that we should interrupt the relationship between an individual and their God seems to me to be pretty monstrous, particularly as the amendment in the name of the Honourable Member for Northampton South specifically says that any activity, communication or prayer shall not influence any person's decision, or more especially obstruct or impede any person. So this is not about interfering with another, this is about expressing a view to oneself, to the Lord, to others perhaps, but that can be said of any prayer at any time. Are we going to arrest people out in other public places? Once this is allowed, I will give way in a second. Once this is permitted, the police are permitted to arrest people for what they think and what they are praying about. Why not arrest them in other public places? Why does it have to be just abortion clinics? Once you open this door, why wouldn't the police arrest people outside mosques or outside temples? Why wouldn't they arrest them in any other public space where they're praying to express a view or opinion, or indeed, as I said, to express it not horizontally, but vertically, to a greater power above us? I give way to the Honourable Lady because I said I would.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. This is an extremely important point, I think, at the moment. I do not believe anyone in this House wants to restrict anyone's right to pray. But what we are trying to differentiate is the impact of that action on the women going in for a very traumatic experience, many of whom will be grieving, many of whom will have been through a traumatic experience to get them to this point, to then be presented with someone who is telling them they are doing the wrong thing and increasing that trauma. And regardless of the intention of the person praying, which I would defend forever, it is the impact on the women which is the problem.
But look, you see, in a free society, impact we make on others by our sentiments, by what we express and do, by what we say, and indeed what we pray about, is the inevitable consequence of the openness which I would have thought in this place we all celebrate. In this case, the amendment specifically says that we shouldn't influence or obstruct. But the more general context here, the context in which we're having this debate, is a world in which the ability to express a view that others might find offensive or unreasonable is being curbed every single day as our freedom is being eroded, and all the things we hold dear are at risk. I won't give way again because I see the Deputy Speaker is not on her feet but edging in her chair and asking me to bring my remarks to a conclusion. Let me say this, that freedom is not about the capacity to hear from others with whom you agree. A free and open society is about one in which you hear from those with whom you don't agree. That freedom is at risk. This amendment is most reasonable, and I urge the House to accept it with these final words from John Buchan, the author. No, I won't give way because the Speaker is telling me not to. With these final words from the author and statesman John Buchan. He said, "While we may think a wall as solid as earth separates civilization from barbarism, the division is a thread, a sheet of glass. Today I will vote against barbarism by voting for this amendment. I mission everyone in this chamber to exercise their conscience and vote for the amendment with me."
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling this debate, and can I commend the way in which the member for Northampton South introduced the amendments and spoke to them at the beginning of this debate. I think that he served the House very, very well. At the outset, can I say that I'm opposed to harassment? I think it's intolerable for a woman to feel that they're harassed at any point. And it's also intolerable for a man to feel that he's harassed. We've had a little demonstration of harassment, mind you, today in the chamber when a member came into the House, told male members to pipe down, it's none of their business essentially, and then beatled out. That's actually harassment in any definition of harassment, and it's wrong and should be called out and named as such. I think this is a good debate. It's important that we have this debate. It's what this chamber is for, and we should not be afraid of combative ideas. But for members just to be told to pipe down because they're male is really not an argument at all that should be entertained in this place. So harassment should be called out, and we should not be afraid of that. And I object to harassment of women when they go into abortion clinics, if that is their free choice and wish to do it. I'm not advocating that at any point. But at the same time, harassment cuts both ways. It's important that a person wishes to pray, if a person wishes to express their identity, if a person wishes to make points that are fair and free and do so in a non-combative way, they should be encouraged to do that. Indeed, I refer to the Home Office 2018 review, where they actually identified that a lot of protests in the United Kingdom and some of the places identified were simply praying, sometimes displaying banners, and sometimes distributing literature. Now, is there proportionate response to that to bring in a law that essentially says you cannot pray silently in public? I'm going to make the point, and then I will give way, that you cannot pray silently in public, because that seems to be what the government is saying today. We're all aware of the Bible story about Daniel daring to pray and being put into jail. Of course, I'll give way to the Minister.
Clarity, the government isn't saying anything on this matter. It's a free vote. There is no government position on the buffer zone amendment.
I look forward to the Minister being with me in the alternative island this evening. I really look forward to that. The fact of the matter is, whenever we walk into this Palace of Westminster, we walk under a massive portrait by Benjamin West of Moses. We walk through St Stephen's. What is St Stephen's? St Stephen's is a church. We walk over the catacombs, which underneath is another church. And we come into this place and we're debating a piece of legislation which, in the mother of parliaments, can you think of it? We're debating a piece of legislation that will essentially say, if you dare to pray in this Christian nation in silence, in a certain part of this Christian nation, you will be arrested. You will be arrested. I want to make the point, and I will give way later on. You will be arrested for doing that. I think members need to stop and really seriously think, is that the sort of law we wish to pass? Is that the sort of law we wish to support? because the government does have an opportunity, and maybe the Minister would intervene on me on this particular. Maybe the Minister, no, you're not the Minister. Maybe the Minister would intervene on me on this particular point. Is the Minister willing to say that the government would exclude from this legislation and take out of scope silent prayer as an indication that this liberty of freedom of thought, of freedom to have an opinion in your head, that is allowed? I think that would be the moderate thing for the government to do. You know, freedom of thought is a right enshrined in the European Convention of Human Rights, Article 9. It's also enshrined in Article 18 of the International Convention of Political Rights. And in the freedom of opinion is enshrined in Article 10 of the European Convention. These are international rights that we should all be supportive of, and which we should defend to the very end, because it is about our right to think, to express, and to hold that opinion which we hold dear. Even if it is an objectionable opinion, even if a person doesn't believe in the God that we're praying to, we're entitled to have that. And to remove it in any way is a removal of a legitimate right. But we had a justification in this House. I really had to pinch myself with a justification made in this House that we should actually limit our thought and limit our opinion. And that was because, I'm going to make a point, and I promise I will give way. The point was made by the member for Ealing, very clearly, that praying in certain places is not the proper place. Now, the member's entitled to that opinion, but where is not the proper place to pray? Is it not the proper place to pray in here? Will that be the next argument? Where ultimately is not the proper place to pray? And the member wants me to give way, I'll happily give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. And I'd like the Honourable Member to help me understand why it's particularly important that prayer must be carried out openly, publicly and ostentatiously. Because if we pray, actually most often, nobody else would know that you're doing it. And the Honourable Member briefly referred to the Bible when he talked about Daniel in the lion's den, and so I'd attract his attention to Matthew 6, verses 5 and 6. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Is it not possible to do that privately without intimidating others by doing it ostentatiously and publicly?
The Gospel of Matthew, of course, and so son of the man, I do know a little bit about this. The Gospel of Matthew, in that, is a wonderful Gospel. Of course, the reference which I made was to Daniel, and Daniel was praying privately in his home. He wasn't, and I did not talk about ostentatious public prayer. Maybe the members should have used their ears and listened to the point I made to the government was about silent prayer, freedom of thought in your head, not freedom of expression outward. I was making that particular point. So if the member had listened, she would have actually got the answer to that particular point that I was making in a moment. When we consider the level of crime across this society, I think there's over 500 knife crimes last year, and we're going to ask the police to actually get engaged and be detained in questioning people about what they're thinking in certain parts of the United Kingdom. I think that's absolutely a complete waste of police resources and police time. And it should not be done. Whenever members will stand up in this House, no doubt, in the future and demand more police action, I think that should be pointed out to them. Well, you know, if we're going to constrain the police into this section and say they must chase after people silently thinking things, or silently worshipping, or silently praying, that is a waste, a complete and total waste of police resources. In Northern Ireland, we brought in a safe access zone law, and indeed that law, whilst I don't like that law, and it was in the Northern Ireland Assembly when I'm a member of this House, but it brought in a piece of legislation which said that there must be there must not be unnecessary or disproportionate response by the police. Unfortunately, what we're doing in this House is bringing in disproportionate actions by the police. and we should be moving away from it. Northern Ireland's law, for example, gives police the right to use discretion and to take steps to calm a protest as opposed to stop a protest. And the other point the legislation does, it says that the Department of Health must maintain and regularly publish a list of all potential premises where clinics could be taking place, so as people are aware of where they are and that they can't be, for example, caught out by maybe wearing a t-shirt or a badge or driving a car through an area with a bumper sticker on it that might give someone offence. And of course I will give way.
Well, thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, because I feel the point that he's just made is incredibly important for the circumstance that I was talking about previously. The lady who was arrested in Birmingham and the police arrived to interrogate and subsequently arrest her. Given the other crimes that were going on in Birmingham at that time, it's important to see that the police clearly determined that the most important thing they had to do at this particular time was not deal with knife crime or people who were stealing tools out of other people's vans to stop their way of living, but to go and arrest and interrogate a woman who was silently praying outside a clinic that was closed. Surely that shows a sense of complete disproportionality on the part of the police.
Order. It's quite important that interventions are short, because I know the honourable gentleman will want to be coming to the conclusion of his remarks now, as he's been 10 minutes. Ian Paisley.
I do agree with the point, and I will conclude this, I do agree with the point that the members made in the intervention, that the arrest of Isabel Vaughan Spruce was atrocious. It sent out a terrible message. It sent out a terrible message to women. It sent out a terrible message to anyone who wishes to engage in silent prayer in this nation. And I'm glad that that conviction, or that attempt for a conviction, was overturned by the court and was thrown out. It's unfortunate that today again she has been arrested by another police officer saying, "What are you thinking? What are you praying?" That is wrong, and we need to stand up against that sort of harassment also.
Annie Kruger.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to speak to the motion laid by my honourable friend for Northampton South relating to Lord's Amendment 5. And now I recognise that there is a genuine problem that the Lords, well, the original bill and the Lords have sought to address, and there is a real issue with harassment, with intimidation, with offensive behaviour directed at women who are going into abortion clinics. And I recognise that that requires policing, and that it's appropriate for the authorities to pay attention and to stop harassment and intimidation. And this House and the other place have decided that additional legislation on top of what's already on the statute book is required to enable that additional policing. And all the arguments made by the honourable lady who has campaigned so hard on this for so long have been accepted by this House, and I don't think there's any particular value in unpicking the arguments that have been made there. That debate has been had. So the question now before us, and the purpose of the amendment made by my honourable friend, is what is to happen in these zones, these safe access zones they're now to be called. And I recognise the intention behind the Lord's Amendment, recognise the intention behind the original clause, but my concern is that in asserting a general principle of something that we do not want, and couching that desire for a general principle in very broad terms, we are making a momentous step. We are crossing an enormous river. Well, a very small river. The Rubicon was actually a very small stream, but it was a momentous step. And when we criminalise prayer or private thought, or indeed consensual conversations between two adults, we are doing something of enormous significance in our country and in our democracy and in a liberal facility. I'm happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I do agree with everything that he's saying, but my concern is, what is the motivation for somebody to silently pray there? What other motivation do they have other than to be seen by a woman who is at her lowest ebb going in for something which is not the best day of her life? In fact, it'll be one of the worst days of her life.
Well, I absolutely recognise that. The difficulty is none of us can know what the motivation is, and we can even accept, as I'm sure the honourable lady suggests, that the motivation is pretty malign by her judgment. It might be a very well-intentioned prayer on her part, but I'm sure the inference the honourable lady is making, that the attempt is to dissuade the lady from accessing the abortion clinic, is genuine. That is no doubt what is going on. My concern is with the principle of this law, how it will be applied, and the precedent that it sets in our democracy. So my concern is that the bill authorises the police to ask exactly the question that the Honourable Lady just asked, which is to go up to a private citizen standing on a street corner, not overtly harassing anybody, and to ask the question that the police asked that lady in Birmingham, which is, what are you praying about? What is in your head at this time? They couldn't spot that she was doing anything offensive, but they concluded that she probably was thinking something that they disapproved of, and they took steps to arrest her. I think that is a very, very concerning step that we are taking as a country, to authorise the police to act in that way. So I think there is happy to give way.
I'm grateful, and I utterly respect the sincerity of why people have moved this amendment and why my honourable friend is supporting it. And I was very pleased to see that the honourable gentleman for Antrim is against harassment. But that's the point about this amendment, because it doesn't say, and any person engaged in consensual communication or silent prayer shall avoid harassment. It says it shall not be taken as harassment. So however ostentatiously someone is praying, or however aggressively they are seeking to open consensual communication with an individual going to a clinic, it shall not be taken to be harassment. So it's a blank cheque for somebody to behave in a harassing way and then to defend themselves and saying, oh, but it says here, what I was doing shall not be taken as harassment.
The behaviour that will not be taken as harassment is the private prayer. Other actions that may be taken, offensively obstructing somebody walking down the streets, I think was his suggestion earlier, that would come in scope. What should not come in scope is somebody thinking something in their head. That is the only defence that we are trying to insist upon, and I invite members to consider whether they want to pass a law that will ban people from thinking something. If there are other means by which harassment is taking place or obstruction, then that should come within scope, or it will come within scope of the law. So I don't think the intention is to stop people praying. I don't think that's what the Honourable Lady wants to do, or the government wants to do, any of us. We do need to send a clear signal of the intention of Parliament through this amendment. And I commend my honourable friend for it, and I do ask members to consider that if they vote against the amendment that he has laid, they are voting to ban private prayer. Of course it's a special case. Of course we're talking about these tiny little zones in circumstances which we can all sympathise with the intention of the clause. The point is the principle of it. Happy to give way.
And for giving way. I think it matters when we come to legislation to be specific. So let's be very clear. This isn't actually even in the amendment proposed by the honourable gentleman from Northampton South about private prayer. It's about silent prayer. It can be done in the face of somebody, can it not, as it is silent prayer, whether it is private in your head what you are thinking. And that's the challenge here. It's not actually about prayer, it's about where it is taking place. So can the honourable gentleman just clarify, for avoidance of doubt, that he has no problem with recognising that somebody praying in your face, silent or not, is unwelcome?
The difficulty is with the private prayer, the silent prayer. That is what we are trying to protect. If they are standing offensively in somebody's face, if they're trying to obstruct their access, then of course they will come within scope. What we're trying to protect is people like this lady who was standing quietly at the side praying to herself, as far as we know. She might have been thinking about her shopping. But that was what the police were interested in. What are you doing standing over here quietly? Of course, the difficulty is how to... I'm afraid to say there is always going to be a difficulty with this new law, because the police are going to be invited, they're going to be required to make all sorts of strange interpretations and judgments about why somebody is doing something. But nevertheless, we're passing a law to create these zones. What we must do is to ensure that people who are doing this utterly inoffensive thing, which is standing quietly at the side praying, happy to give way.
Can I just give him the example of Ealing? They've had it since 2018, so this is now year 6. Only 3 breaches have occurred. None of them have resulted in a conviction, because these people are usually law-abiding. There's only one that came close, and it's still being legislated. I think it's probably sub judice, but it's because that was being done as a stunt. In reality, these things don't occur. People can pray elsewhere, and every Royal Medical College, the College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the BMA, all medical opinion supports this.
Okay, well, I'll wind up, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I think the points have been well rehearsed. My concern is with the principle that we're setting here, and of course this is a case in which everybody must have sympathy with these women who need to protect them from harassment. But where does this lead, and what are we doing by saying that people should not be allowed to pray quietly on their own?
Nick Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to speak today with regards to Laws Amendment 5 and the motion put forward by my honourable friend at the side of me. Buffer zones are basically the public space protection orders, and they're 150 metres area that they cover. PSPOs, as they are called, are generally used for antisocial behaviour. We do have 3 in Doncaster, apparently, and I've actually applied for one personally myself in Conisbrough, in my constituency. We have a set of seating in the middle of town where we have people under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and we do have beggars there, and they're causing a nuisance of themselves, antisocial behaviour, and it's actually killing the town centre. However, I've been refused one of these PSPOs there. I will continue because I do think it's the right thing to do. But what these do is going to put a buffer zone, a PSPO, around every single clinic in the country, and it's going to be mandatory to do that. Now, regardless of what we think about that, I just want to tell people in this house and in my constituency what this is going to look like. It's going to look like that the drunks and the people under the influence of drugs in Conisbrough are going to be able to continue to make a nuisance of themselves. They're going to continue to damage the local economy. They're going to continue to scare old people who want to go into the shops and young people. And yet, a lady or a gentleman who's actually got a real strong faith and believes that they can actually help these people that are coming in is not going to be able to do that. Now, one of the honourable members on the other side says praying and standing in front of somebody, and also the lady on my side of this house was talking about why do they have to do it there. Well, if this is the worst day of a woman's life, and I would imagine, and I accept that it probably is one of the worst days of a woman's life, if she saw somebody there who was praying respectfully and who was there to help, and they knew that these people were there, then they can ignore that lady. They can ignore that gentleman who's praying. They can just walk in. Or if it's the worst day of their life, they might actually want somebody just to turn to for that second. They might actually want somebody to turn to. And if somebody's been coerced into going into one of these places and to have a forced abortion, again, that could be somebody there who's actually there to help. Now, I agree with everybody else in this house. Shouting, screaming, holding up placards is an awful thing to do. It shouldn't happen. But silent prayer and consensual conversations should not be banned. And I'll just refer back to what I said. The papers will get hold of this in a year's time, and we are the party of law and order. And we will be arresting people for prayer, and we will be arresting people for conversations, and we will be letting the people that are harassing all the public that go into our towns, into our shops, we will be letting them continue what we're going to do. So I ask all Conservative members in this House to think about this amendment that my honourable friends put forward. All he's simply asking for is for people to allow to pray and for people to allow to have those consensual conversations. And his second amendment is that we actually, before we put this in place, we actually do a review on it. That's what I'm asking for. Thank you very much.
I think it's worth, Madam Deputy Speaker, looking at what Amendment A says. It says no offence is committed under subsection 1 by a person engaged in consensual communication or in silent prayer. And for the avoidance of doubt, it goes on to say that nothing in Amendment A should allow people to be harassed or their decision to be changed, or to, for instance, kneel down and pray right in front of somebody's face, or to block the pavement, or to indulge in any kind of harassing. No, I'm not going to give way to the honourable gentleman who's intervened many times already, and I've been asked to speak very briefly. So I think it's worth looking at what this amendment is, and I think it's worth asking the question that was put by the police officer to the lady. The police officer asked her, "Are you praying?" In other words, there was nothing she was obviously doing which was harassment or in any way objectionable. The police officer had to actually go into her mind. She was just standing there. I don't think it's even clear that she was even kneeling. And this is what surely is quite dangerous. And really, I am going now, in speaking, to this chamber far beyond what that lady was doing. Of course, I'm not indulging in any objectionable behaviour by expressing my thoughts. I'm not harassing anybody. But everybody in this chamber, in a sense, is being forced to listen to me. And I've spent 39 years, no doubt, irritating people and even boring them. And they can't shut their ears. But this lady wasn't actually saying anything. And the policeman actually had to go up to her and ask her what she was doing. And therefore, if we're going to have a law, it's got to be capable, this is a criminal law, it's got to be capable of actually being effective. And the reason why George Orwell's novel of 1984 resonates so much with all of us is that the state was not trying to regulate people's actions, it was regulating what goes on in their mind. And that's why, ever since that novel has been written, people have felt that this is probably the most advanced form of totalitarianism, where you are not simply trying to regulate people's behaviour, but you are regulating their mind. I think what the debate is about, of course, is that those who oppose my honourable friend are determined to stop anybody indulging in anything, in any kind of protest, if it could be deemed to be some sort of protest, even if it is entirely silent. Now, the whole point of the Public Order Bill, as I understand it, and why I support it, is that it does not outlaw peaceful protest, but what the government is saying is that the people who are making that protest are deliberately trying to obstruct the rights of other citizens by blocking roads or whatever. So that is the point of the Public Order Bill. The Public Order Bill has now been hijacked by people who want to stop completely silent, peaceful process. And a case hasn't yet been mentioned of Livia Tossica-Bolt. She was, in the last few days, told by council officers in Bournemouth that she would be fined simply for holding up a sign saying, "Here to talk if you want," inside a buffer zone. She wasn't holding up a sign with any graphic images. She wasn't trying to intimidate anybody. Please, if you want to talk, I'm here. This is a very difficult day for you. If you want any advice, please. And she was stopped by the police. In other words, this woman, this lady, was told that she could not offer other women who may, in some circumstances, be coerced into attending an abortion clinic or feel they lack the resources to continue a pregnancy, the opportunity to talk if they should want to. We cannot criminalise such peaceful activity. Where are we going? Where will this stop? So I believe, and this is where I will end, and I think this is now the shortest speech, that this is an entirely worthwhile, harmless, moderate amendment, and I hope that people will support it.